Okay.
Okay. Hello, good morning. Welcome to this pre-event of the 18 International Docomomo Conference and Student Workshop that will be held in Santiago in Chile in 2024. As probably you know, this pre-event is based on the modern neighborhood units in Chile. We have two guest speakers, Umberto Bonomo. He is architect from the Istituto Universitario de Arquitectura di Venecia and PhD from the Catholic University in Chile. He is also professor at the School of Architecture of the Catholic University in Chile. And he is the director, the head of the Cultural Heritage Center at the Catholic University also. He is very well known as a very prolific author on one of the neighborhoods he is going to talk this in this session. The other guest speaker is Rodrigo Gertosio. Rodrigo is architect from the Universidad Central de Chile. He's professor at the Universidad Tecnológica Metropolitana and PhD candidate at the PhD program of the Catholic University. And now he is in a research stage at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Thank you both for the acceptance of this invitation and for this second pre-event. And of course, we are going to have these two presentations and then some time for questions and comments. Thank you, and go ahead. I think it's Umberto is the first. Go ahead, Umberto. Thank you.
Thank you, Horacio. Thank you very much to all of you to be here today and be part of this pre-event of the Docomomo International Congress that we are organizing with Horacio and all the team here in Chile. Yeah, I'm going to share. It's visible? It's working? Okay. Thank you very much to all of you. Today I will talk about the modern neighborhood unit in Santiago, exploring the common space. Okay. The presentation that I will show you today is related with a specific topic in which I have been working in the last time, and it's referred precisely with the common space. The urban space traditionally has been understood as the dichotomous confrontation between private space of the dwelling and the public space of the same city. However, in recent years, studies focusing on the analysis of the common space have multiplied. This is probably because the idea of the common has returned to be part of the discussion that underlie architecture, urbanism, sociology, and anthropology, and because this idea reflects the way in which we live together. The idea of the common is an important value for our society, forgotten and scarcely valued in academic and political discussion. In this presentation, it is proposed that the idea of the common is a valuable approach to the architectural, urban, and social heritage of the great neighborhood unit built in Santiago during the 20th century. This presentation explores spatial and formal characteristics of these experiences of modern architecture and urban planning, discusses the challenges they are facing and their potential in understanding the common space as a field of future project and a new heritage approach that it's important to preserve. When the concept of the common is analyzed, both from the field of architecture and from the other social science and humanities, it is possible to notice how quickly the field of meaning link of these terms flourish. The contribution of the historiography on the great modern housing complexes and neighborhood units in general do not identify the significant value that the common space has in this radical operation of urban design and architecture. In these writings, normally these proposals are referred to as collective housing projects inserted in vast green recreational areas for the inhabitant. What is suggested here is that the neighborhood unit built in Santiago and in all the continent in general between 1940 and 70 not only revolutionized the image of the city, providing new scales to the housing factory, they meant an even greater revolution due to the fact of capturing the common space as a new urban dimension and an indeterminate place of diffuse ownership and articulated governance. The common space of modern neighborhood unit is probably one of the most important inventions of the modern architecture, and very probably also one of the weakest and misunderstood flanks of this residential project for the metropolis. The common space in the neighborhood unit of the second post-war. The question that guides this reflection has to do with how the residential block transformation transformed the neighborhood unit of the second post-war in Santiago. In the neighborhood units of the second post-war, the use of the apartment block or the tower in the later cases impacts on the occupation of the land, on the amount and availability of the common space for recreation, on the location of community facilities in the property system, and therefore in the governance of model of said urban realities. In the second post-war neighborhood unit, the garden city layout were replaced by green areas not crossed by vehicular streets and therefore configuring macro blocks penetrated only by pedestrian access pathways to the apartment buildings. In a research project that I've developed in Chile called Architecture and Housing Policy in Chile, 13 Housing Project in Santiago, I've studied the relationship that exists between the political context, laws, institutional development, and the construction of neighborhood units in Santiago. To install heavily the idea of ownership in Chile in 1937, the well-known horizontal property laws or co-ownership laws was approved. The sale by floor law or the horizontal property law number 671 of 1937 provided that the floor or apartment into which a building was divided could belong to different owners and that each owner was the exclusive owner of its floor or apartment. This law also defined common space, which corresponded to the spaces necessary for the existence, security, and conservation of the building, and the spaces that allow each and every one of the owners the use of and enjoyment of the floor or apartment of their exclusive domain. This fact must be considered really fundamental because supposes that the models of administration, ownership, and relationship of the family with its own space transgress the limit of the house or the apartment and invade the space shared by all, such as corridors, stairwells, elevators, accesses, gardens, and the equipment of the community itself, which in turn is inserted and opens up to the city. The parliamentary discussion that resulted in the approval of this law of 1937 are very relevant. The construction of the collective building, which are real houses superimposed on the same site, means an appreciable economy in relation to the single-family building, both in the cost of the work and in the acquisition of the land. There is no doubt that the modern architecture has imposed the large building of many floors divided into departments as those that can provide greater advantages and comfort, and that this form of building will be extended much more in the future. This was part of the discussions in 1935 and 6. This graph thus is moved from the one discipline to another, showing how housing standard determined by laws promoted and in some cases limited the development of the architecture and the city project proposed by the construction companies or the architects of the period. In other words, the concrete results of the laws and the desire of the government of the studied period on the subject of housing are today reflected in the sets that we are built at the time. The study of housing policies for the period 1948 and 73 has clarified the process of the consolidation of the state as the main actor in the construction of housing in Chile. If the approval law 9135 of 1948 mean the opening to the private companies in the business of housing through important tax exemption, the other important law 285 of 1953 with the creation of Corby and the DFL number 2 of 59 extended such exemption in such a way as to further encourage the participation of the private sector. This measure gave more resources and prominence to the state for the construction of housing. Finally, in 1965, creation of Ministry of Housing and Urbanism also established new institutions like Cormo, for example. What you can see in this graph, you can compare and see how the modernization of the establishment and the government and the state and the laws create and have a very strong impact in the building of many neighborhood unit and housing project in Santiago, but not also in Santiago. Specifically, in part, companies receive a significant boost from these law approvals. With the approval of Ley Pereira, for example, in 1948, through which the Chilean legislative system addresses to the private sector, semi-fiscal institutions such as the Provident Fund, the executive or the municipality exhorting them to build housing, those resorting to the benefit that such measures provided. Some of the main construction finishes in Santiago by the saving banks and the impart companies demonstrate that the adoption of the modern architecture patterns constitutes a strategic choice among the multiple styles of the time. The private employees fund sought to solve the disadvantage presented by the housing construction system individually, where the imposing was the one who had to look for the site and the builder. Under this figure, the most important construction company of the moment were not involved in the process, since only a project of small dimension and limited investment were carried out. On the other hand, in 1953 can be considered a key year for the political institutional context of the country. It is at this moment that the Corporación de la Vivienda, Corvi, was constituted. This organization, which initially depended of the Ministry of Public Works, was the protagonist during the 50s and the 60s of public housing production in the country. This institutional structure remained stable until 1959 with the approval of DFL number 2, which expanded Corvi's power, transforming into the centralizing agency for housing policies. One of the measures of this regulation established that Corvi will take charge of the investment department and technical departments of the different social security funds. Only on July 31 of 1959, Chile began to apply the decree of with force of law, better known, as I said, DF number 2, which incorporated some important modification to the law 9135 on affordable housing. With the approval of this decree with force of law, which eliminated the 5-story limits for housing project, economic project, some of the neighborhood unit projects that were under construction were modified, and towers or high-rise building began to be included into the affordable housing proposal, thus contributing a new scale to the urban context of Santiago, which was facing an important process of metropolization. While Corvi was during the 50s and 60s the key institution in the production of housing, in 1965 the creation of Ministry of Housing and Urbanism was fundamental for consolidation of a new administrative structure in terms of housing. The main function of MIMBU was the formulation of the state housing policies, which up to the time had been covered by different institutions or corporations in a fragmented and independent manner. Thus, with the measure, the CORMU, Corporación del Mejoramiento Urbano, was created, a semi-autonomous corporation under MIMBU that had many more power than Corvi to intervene. Among the most important powers, it was worth mentioning the possibility of expropriating land in order to increase density and stop the expansion of urban area of the capital or other Chilean cities. As a result of this decision, large deteriorated sector were intervening in Santiago with very ambitious projects in urban terms. Among them, for example, the San Borja remodeling, the Inés de Suárez remodeling, or the Mapocho Bulnes sectional, or, for example, Tupac Amaru sectional that we can see in these images. The classification and ordering the planimetric information related to the cases studied in this investigation project has allowed us to define analytical category that synthesize the general characteristic of each of the groups respectively. The first group, the IMPART project, we called it typological exploration. The first moment was an instance of experimental housing production in which new forms of grouping departments and housing were tested for the Chilean context. The second one, the group of buildings built by Corvi, we called it rationalization and typological radicalization. At this time, under the aegis of Corvi, rational and efficient typologies were established that will be replicated both in Santiago and the national territory. And the third group, the group of project in terms of CORMU, we called it typological efficiency. The CORMU, with its intervention, proposed undoubtedly radical assemblies as in the case of San Borja remodeling, but efficiency is the distinguishing features of this intervention. Further information of the concept of efficiency is described in the specific objective. What I've been able to show is that in the period between 1948 and 1973 in Chile, there is a radical inversion of the way in which land is used. In the first project, constructed by Empart Building, occupied 80% of the available land, while in the project constructed by Corvi and Cormu, only the 20% of the land was occupied by building, and the other 80% was free for the use of the community. A fundamental example of this is Unidad Vecinal Portales, built in Santiago de Chile in 1954 by Bershani, Valdés, Castillo, and Huidobro. This neighborhood unit was built in the Quinta Normal de Agricultura, and the site that were used for agricultural experimentation were transformed into this great and emblematic residential complex in Latin America. In 1954, when the Bershani, Valdés, Castillo, y Huidobro office developed the project, it did so with the extensive use of long apartment blocks on a common ground, taking advantage of the margin of co-ownership law. The 31 hectares on which the building was built are no longer a lot of owner with single-family houses, but a large joint ownership, a common land shared by the 11,000 inhabitants who would live there. The construction of the community was an explicit intention by the institution that built the complex in line with the postulates that have been introduced by Gideon in the book Architecture and Community, where the Swiss author highlights the role of architecture in the educational process of the community. In this case, for example, murals and bas-relief by the Chilean plastic sculptor Ricardo Irarrázaval were included in Unidad Vecinal Portales. The common space of the housing complexes was the heart of community life, the place to share and create a new society. This common space could not be anonymous, conventional, and mute, but had to be able to communicate, educate, and excite the new inhabitant. Today, 60 years later, Unidad Vecinal Portales is a renovated neighborhood with recovered common spaces, with a central location in the urban area of Santiago, connected with the urban motorways and metro station. Its area of green spaces per inhabitant is its area of green spaces per inhabitant is much higher than the standards proposed by the World Health Organization and higher than the average of green spaces for all inhabitants in the city. By comparing the pandemic life of the inhabitants of neighborhood unit with this neighborhood unit with the rest of inhabitants of the metropolis of Santiago, we easily understand the validity and the currency of these ideas. The project aimed to improve the quality of life of people by providing them with not only residential, modern, healthy, and well-built houses, but also with spaces to make the great dream of community life possible. The word common is synonymous with sharing, and in architectural, sharing can be understood as the capacity to articulate scale, relationship, and the condition of domain of the public space of the city with the private one of the houses. As analyzed here, the common space was an important project innovation from a formal, legal, and conceptual point of view that challenged the traditional use and administration system of the city. It was also a space of strong creative possibility, the place to which, in the modern neighborhood units, the role of creating the new community was assigned. It was also a new space, not only well-defined from a normative and legal framework, that the modern neighborhood unit, if analyzed in retrospect, challenge the constructive possibility of new materials, demonstrate the power of idea and the capacity of the project to build new imaginary when they are accompanied by political will. The most controversial aspect of those proposals lie precisely in their ability to build community, considering that societies changes in time and architecture not always can do it easily. What is known is that in the most of them, the architectural and urban features have created neighborhoods with a strong identity from their initial year to the present. To conclude, if we understand that heritage is a social construction, a field of live, dynamic, and open conflict, and not just a crystallized field of successes and exemplary situation, we realize that the great neighborhood unit of the second post-war and the great modern residential complexes are the reflection and result of significant and complex process of urban, social, technological, constructive, legal, and institutional modernization. It is under this dynamic and this polyhedral dimension that must be understood, studied, interpreted, and eventually recovered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Umberto. Thank you so much for your presentation. Let me ask Rodrigo now to share the presentation. Thank you, Rodrigo.
Hello, do you hear me? Okay, good morning. I'm Rodrigo Gertosio, a doctoral candidate in architecture and urban studies at the Universidad Católica de Chile and a member of Docomomo Chile. Today, I will present my doctoral research in progress. It is entitled Green Heritage, Modern Housing Complexes and Their Ecosystem Services. Numerous housing complexes of modern architecture has been considered as heritage sites worldwide. They have been assigned a series of tangible and intangible attributes and values by specialists, academics, and their communities. However, unlike most of the heritage built until the early 20th century, one of their most significant attributes is not their buildings, but rather the space between them, especially in the public spaces and green areas. It happens in diverse flat-flung parts of the world. In Santiago de Chile, for example, of the 4 cases officially declared as heritage, the housing complex in Parque Salvador Sur, Villa Frey, and Villa Olímpica highlight the green areas as part of their attributes. Also in Hans Abierte in Berlin, highlight the green areas as part of their attributes. Or Residencial San Felipe in Lima, Peru. The green areas are explicitly described as value-bearing attributes in the nomination for World Heritage and National Heritage, respectively. Everything indicates that the more than a building is bearer of value, it is the territory and its landscape that become a somewhat more complex and cultural asset. All share 3 elements that distinguish them. First, the numerous blocks of medium height distributed in various configurations within large blocks. Second, the scarce presence of soil sealed with concrete between the blocks. And third, the abundant vegetation from grass, shrubs, and large trees between their blocks. From the air, thanks to drones and satellites, It's possible to observe how this vegetation not only surrounds blocks and houses in isolation, but forms fragmented distinct contained between clusters of blocks connecting along a network of paths, passages, streets, and avenues. Even in some cases, rather than a housing complexes with lots of vegetation, they look like parks with buildings inside. Of course, all of the above it's not exclusive to the heritage cases, but can also be seen in countless other examples within the immersive housing production built up to the 1970s and in cities as distant as those described. Despite this, although everyone described green areas are part of their heritage, we know little about them. In Chile, at least, the absence of tree registers and their condition, as well as their protection within heritage frameworks, are proof of this. Without this information, it is tough to pinpoint the role of vegetation between its scenic or emotional value. There is too much to learn and explore, but know how to care for trees, but rather about the direct and indirect benefits we obtain from their ecological processes. However, conserving this plant heritage implies several challenges. Unlike like a building, green areas are alive and constantly changing. Many times, in this type of housing complexes, green areas are vast combination of vegetation in both public and private space, which requires, of course, the efforts of many, like a lady watering the public green areas outside of their block, for example, she. But there is also a problem of knowledge. Although most studies of these complexes highlight them as a part of their activities, there is a little research that describes them as a source of environmental benefits related to the urban morphology, as well as few who venture to address the problem of their conservation in the context of climate change. This scenario leads to a second problem. If part of the cultural values is associated with green areas, it means that if they deteriorate and are lost as a result of the effects described above, it is very likely that not only will it impact numerous ecological cycles that depend on vegetation, but it also diminish the heritage value. The valuation that, as some authors state, far from being static is rated dynamic, that it can vary if environmental conditions change. This highly probable change of events proved two things. In these housing complexes, the cultural and ecological dimensions go hand in hand, and therefore the problem of their sustainability is interdisciplinary. The combination of three distinct disciplines, urban planning, heritage, and natural science, can reveal, for example, how the urban structure of a specific housing complex typology present in most cities in the world can influence the provision and maintenance of a particular ecosystem services, especially relevant for climate change mitigation and adaptation. Demonstrating the above can potentially build a new cultural values from ecology for these housing complexes. In this context, the classic first question arises: how preserve this green heritage? This research proposed to demonstrate that one possible way is to expand our knowledge about them, specifically their ability to provide urgent ecosystem services in the context of climate change, and how the urban morphology of these complexes promotes and conditions them. In this way, these services are valuable for their practical and inherent value, as they contribute to resilience and the sustainability of a larger scale within cities. As a methodology, a combination of techniques was employed, involving the use of satellite images, the NDVI index to identify vegetation fragments, as well as the LST temperature index as a spectral classification model to analyze land cover composition. Instruments applied at an urban scale in an area composed by 9 housing complexes of the former Corvi, or Corporación de la Vivienda Housing Corporation, and a group of 3 contiguous complexes located in the commune of Ñuñoa, Santiago de Chile, Villa Los Presidentes, Villa Los Jardines, y Villa Frey. This presentation has 2 sections and conclusions. 1, benefits, services, and heritage value, or ecosystem services as a cultural heritage. 2, the modern urban project and its ecosystem services, the case study, and 3, the conclusions. 1. Benefits, services, and heritage values. Although at first glance they may appear to be distinct concepts, ecosystem services and cultural heritage share something in common. Ultimately, people place value on something or discover its value based on the benefits we derive from it. Thus, the mere fact of identifying a service necessarily implies a process of attributing value to something. Of course, individuals may attribute different value to the same element, as well as we are driven by diverse interests and perspectives. For example, let's take an example, this image of Villa Frey in Ñuñoa. Behind all that vegetation hides a building of 4 floors and 16 apartments. Of course, all that vegetation did not grow by itself. Different people at different times planted them, and they have been cared for years by many others. Therefore, it is not strange that they have an emotional value and belonging for all. Values that have crossed borders and today are part of the official heritage values, according to legal degree of the neighborhood unit Villa Frey. On the other hand, for a botanist or specialist in ecology, this frame probably has the values thanks to its ability to reduce the ambient temperature, capture carbon, and improve air quality, among many others. In other words, beyond the emotional value of a few, there are instrumental values that are received and taken advantage of by many. These brief examples show how the concept of benefit, ecosystem services, and value can be related to describe the same object, a group of trees. Urban ecosystem services is a broad concept that refers to the benefit we people derive from the ecosystem in urban context. It is anthropocentric and relatively recent concept that does not hide the interest of instrumentalizing that something for our material or unmaterial benefits. That is, it refers to the value based on this unity of capacity to achieve other desired outcomes, and therefore we understand them as a service. But also, this approach places particular emphasis on recognizing and making evident the intrinsic value that exists in the ecosystems, a product of their ecological processes. All in all, the ultimate goal of the ecosystem services is to make these services visible for consideration by decision makers. In the framework of ecosystem services, Chan differentiates these 3 concepts as follows. Benefits refers to the valuable goods and experience people obtain from the ecosystems, those who experience direct advantage through their connection with the natural environment. On the other hand, ecosystem services are the processes and dynamics of the ecosystem that supports the benefits above. Finally, values represent the preference, principles, and virtues individuals or groups hold about ecosystem and their services. In this way, values are understood as an added quality that individuals attribute to particular objects that make them worthy of appreciation. In this sense, the environmental dimension influences how people perceive and appreciate ecosystem benefits and services, which can guide their decisions and action in managing and protecting the natural environment. Interestingly, among the 3 concepts, ecosystem services is suitable between benefits and values. Going back to the beginning, identifying a service is necessary implies a process of attributing values to something, since it's people who grant value to that something or discover its value based on the benefit they obtain. In the research, new questions arise. To what extent or in what way can the evaluation of ecosystem services, especially those related to climate change mitigation and adaptations, become new heritage values? And consequently, how can regulating ecosystem services be incorporated into heritage preservation frameworks for housing developments in the modern movement? The distinction between benefits, services, and values in the context of ecosystem services is essential to understand not only how people relate to ecosystems, but also how their natural resources, especially in urban context, can be efficiently valued, managed, and protected. Ecosystem services can be divided into three groups: cultural service, provisioning service, and climate regulation service. As shown in the diagram, these services are directly related to continuous vegetation and permeable soil. The larger and more extensive, the greater the regulation ecosystem services they provide. Two, modern urban projects and their ecosystem services, the case study. This is the city of Santiago de Chile. An extensive gray stain reflects the shape of its urbanization between mountain range and island hills. The light blue color shows all the housing complexes characterized by isolated blocks within large blocks between the 1940s and 1970s. The soft box shows the sector of the study. In this frame, we can see all 9 housing complexes. We select this frame for 4 reasons: quantity, variety, quality, and intensity. Quantity refers to the many of different shapes of each building shows, variety of the different shapes that shown in each housing complexes, quality because 3 of them are part of natural heritage sites, and intensity of this vegetation. In this image, we can see how is the difference, especially difference between how is the block related to one to another. In 1960, that is, during the period of design and construction of most of these complexes in the study area, coincide with the promulgation of the first intercommunal regulatory plan of Santiago. The relevance of this instrument is enormous for several reasons. Among others, it established urban regional planning in Chile, determining the limits of urban and suburban areas. It's shown the zoning of civic centers, roads, green spaces, industrial residences, and equipment rooms. In addition, it projected a green belt through a system of green spaces in different categories, which surrounded and contained the growth of Santiago. But it also includes something interesting: the green wage, as we can see in the left plan. Although it doesn't say it that way, it refers to long fragments that connect the nature to the periphery with the center of the cities, like this one. Several examples exist, such as the Warsaw Plan, the Copenhagen Five-Finger Plan, and the Amsterdam Extension Plan. In all these schemes, it is possible to observe the combination of belts that in some way seeks to control the growth of the cities, but also incorporates strips of green spaces from the periphery to the center of the cities. The intercommunal regulatory plan of Santiago of 1960 explicitly proposed 2 decisions that sought to bring the exceptional conditions of the foothills closer to the city. 1, it projects a new diagonal avenue to expand the city to the southeast. This is represented with a segment yellow and continuous green line. As shown in the detail of the plan, here, it is northerly how these diagonal lines culminate at the patronal house of Viña Caucinho Macul to the southeast of Santiago, as shown in the same detail of the plan. The plan sought to connect existing green areas such as Parque O'Higgins and Avenida Mata to the west with the newly created Avenida Grecia and the green space surrounding the Vineyards main house to the southeast. This is the diagonal, and that's how the plan wants to unite big green areas that exist to this moment. 2. This sector is designated as a suburban forest reserve. This area comes to the foothills on the right, crossing Americo Vespucio, here, to the limit of an existing road or to the left. Here we can see more easily. This area comes from the foothills on the hill, as I say, crossing Americo Vespucio, this line, to the limit of an existing road to the left, here. Right in this section, there is another diagonal in yellow that continues with Rodrigo de Araya, this way, this, to the limit, continue to the northeast, connecting to the north with the boundary of these strips. In 1954 image, we can see, in this 1954 image, we can see how the housing complexes were built over former agricultural fields. It is, we can see how some of the streets of the agricultural net coincide with the form of the later built complexes, like in this place, in this place, in this place, and the other cases that Umberto mentioned recently. 16 years later, the landscape has changed radically. Once were fields where fruits and vegetables were grown, today there are thousands of housing. It is interesting to note how the soil was a little sealed by concrete surface, and that there are almost no trees. Not all the modern housing complexes in Santiago has the same luck. The photos on the left show two complexes in Providencia, very close to the center of Santiago, that had landscape projects from their beginnings, as seen in the photos on the left. However, the two pictures on the right sector show the opposite. The last image of Villa Los Presidentes, a complex we will analyze next. This one. Again, we can see this photo like we can see today. Now, when observing this sector today under the NDVI vegetation index, it is possible to observe the following. Within the white line polygons representing the housing complexes, it is possible to observe numerous fragments and concentrations of intense green pixels. On the left edge of the frame, there is a fragment of extreme green pixels in a line from a parallel to the edge of the complex. Here we can see, and the difference without the vegetation shows in red. This fragment corresponds to the San Eugenio Park, belonging to Villa Canada sectors 3 and 4. On the contrary, the group of clusters within the red sector of the frame shows an every yellow and green pixelation. In them, numerous concentration of intense green pixels fragments whose NDVI fluctuate between 0.37 and 0.51 represent the vegetation of Villa Los Presidentes, Villa Los Jardines, and Villa Frey, this sector. If we approach to these sets, we can see an interesting fragment in which its green areas are surrounding it. If we highlight only the sectors that have isolated blocks and equipment such as schools, stores, and the health center, we can see how they are all related to the green areas. As you can see, we can see the green belt, two housing complexes attached, and how they're connected green areas with main avenues and the colleges and the equipment of health and commerce. This is in the line what the NDVI indicates. When changing the scale of observation, numerous dark fragments are observed, indicating a higher density of photosynthetically active vegetation within each of these complexes. In addition, it is interesting to note how the green fragments accompany the edge of the clusters along to the perimeters avenues, especially Rodrigo de Araya and Ignacio Carrera Pinto. This is the Ignacio Carrera Pinto Street and Rodrigo Araya Street, the two diagonals. In this sense, the mosaic matrix is yellow and green, with fragments of red pixels indicating little or no vegetation. That is, the matrix of the frame shows even vegetation with pieces of building its interior. While NDVR provides information of the quantity and quality of vegetation in a given area, spectral classification models are a fundamental tool for identifying ecosystem services in a given area. These models are based to analyze of satellite image or remote sensing data, which allow the identification and differentiation of land and vegetation covers present on the Earth's surface. This makes it possible to identify specific patterns and characteristics of vegetation, pastures, and crops. These different land covers play a crucial role in the provision of ecosystem services, as each type of vegetation can contribute differently to climate regulation, air and water purification, and biodiversity conservation, among other benefits. The following spectral classification model shows the composition of the framing in 5 categories in terms to soil permeability and type of tree vegetation. In white, we can see the constructive soil, that means paved soils or soils with construction that prevent vegetation growth. 2, the bare soil, sites with no or little vegetation but with natural soil. 3, pastures, as green areas covered by herbaceous vegetation throughout the year. 4, the evergreen woody, trees and shrubs that present yearly foliage. And 5, deciduous woody, trees and shrubs that present foliage only during the summer season. In the frame, if you see this frame, almost everything is green. You can see the green belt of the two diagonals, Rodrigo Araya and Ignacio Carrera Pinto. Between them, a very green traffic circle here. There is a green belt with diagonals below and above Gracie Avenue, too, we can see. The green fragments accompany the avenue and penetrate towards the interior surrounding the residential blocks, like here. If you can see, the fragments of vegetation starts along the avenue and penetrate the housing complexes and taken to another and connected another avenue. It is impressive how the soil grown surface changed to the other side of Amerigo Vespucio, like this way. Near two diagonals here are fragments of grass corresponding to soccer fields. The main greennesses in the park surround the block of Villa Los Presidentes here. As you can see, a big park. It is a park with buildings placed inside. This park connects Avenida Grecia here with the lower diagonal here and continues south until it gets to the Edge Park, Rodrigo Araya. All the green areas are continuous. Seen this way, the sector's block of buildings look like small island within a large green fragment. About the classification categories, we can say there are longer fragments of deciduous arboreal pixels and bare ground. Interestingly, there is a cove of evergreen 3 pixels surrounding the blocks of 2 villas, like this, in 2 sectors. In the house sectors, bare soils and deciduous 3 fragments dominate, and 3 fragments are concentrated in squares, like this, in the center of the image. Along the diagonals, Ignacio Carrera Pinto and Rodrigo Araya, there are some many deciduous 3 fragments in grass, like this. If we look at gray lines representing the streets and passages, we can affirm that the more streets and passages there are, the less vegetation cover there is. And finally, more intense green fragments surround the blocks in the micro block sectors. This means that there is a evergreen vegetation surrounding the blocks. Finally, The LST temperature index showed that the spots with lower temperatures are found precisely in sectors of isolated block of both sides in the same on the frame, and it's on the edge, the green belt, surrounding the Rodrigo de Araya traffic circle here. Although it is observed that the temperature fragments are even, there are sectors that show noticeable difference between higher and lower degrees of heat. Among them, the main one is the dark blue spots in the western vertex of Villa Los Presidentes, here. Contrary to the yellow and red dot in the gymnasium of the Juan Gómez Millas campus of the Universidad de Chile, here. The difference between both temperatures is almost 10 grades, respectively. As shown below, the combination of vegetation as permeable soil cover, in addition to certain spatial conditions of the urban project, explain this difference. Conclusions. The case study, seen from its planning and from the ecosystem services approach, shows the interesting coincidence between past and present. The instrument shows allow to explain that ecosystem services were part of a larger planning at urban scales. In other words, the green areas on the analyzed complexes come from the coordination between a larger scale planning, specifically between the crossing of the rural layout and what was proposed in the intercommunal plan of 1960, as well as in the design of each complex. This coherence between urban and architectural project not only explains the network of green areas as a belt between avenues, parks, and squares to the gardens surrounding the blocks, but also all of their equipment is closely related to the green areas forming a circuit. Seen as a green infrastructure, beyond just lowering the temperature, the large areas of permeable soil with continued vegetation indicate the presence of important ecosystem services of climate regulation in different parts of the capital. Going back to the beginning, we are the people who give value to something or discover its value based on the benefits we obtain from them. Thus, the mere fact of identifying an ecosystem service necessarily implies a process of attributing value to something. That certain ecosystem services are present depending on the spatial configuration of the built environment allows us to identify two things more clearly. Where are those fragments that allow for higher and better services, and therefore where to replicate them? In the context of modern housing complexes, demonstrating the capacity of this landscape to contribute to mitigate some effects of climate change would allow to activating heritage process from other disciplines such as natural science. With this, it is possible to identify, monitor, and advance not only in maintaining the vegetation, but also in how to preserve these environmental benefits and thereby expand the range of the meaning of the landscape associated with the urbanism of the modern movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Wow, I think we have two visions very complementary here. So I'm going to ask first if Rodrigo has some question to Umberto and vice versa, if Umberto has some questions to Rodrigo. I think both presentations are completely complementary, going on the topic of the free space. May I explain, because sometimes it's public with activities, sometimes it's only green, and I think both are very integrated in the same issue.
Horacio, thank you. Yeah, I have a comment, not a question, but a comment, and I think that, as you said, the two presentations are very, very complementary in terms of underlie the importance of neighborhood unit and the generosity of common space in this moment, in that moment, that the 50 and the 60, and the the capital of that generosity until today. It's very interesting the quality of the city that modern architecture and modern urbanism built in the mid of the 20th century in all around the world in general. I think that that generosity is very, very, very great for the life of inhabitants in that moment and also today.
Yeah, I think it's true what you say. It's very interesting what all my interesting to what I have shown begins with Be Afraid. When I saw Be Afraid, it's full of vegetation, and that thing I can see in other housing complexes, even in other countries. It's a common element that repeats over and over again. I see in many parts of the world that occur this, even in the space that has a bad condition of maintenance. Even in abandoned spaces exist trees. It's a thing that calls me a lot of attention. As you well said, Umberto, the common space and what we put in the common space and how every people have the opportunity to plant wherever they want, because they have a lot of permeable soil, or have a lot of space to do whatever they want. It's a space with a lot of free of how can I say, those spaces can accept different ways to occupy the spaces, in this case with vegetation.
Thank you both. There's any question or comments?
You have questions? Maybe Claudio? No?
Yeah, I have a question.
I know. Yes, go ahead.
But more to Rodrigo. Well, it's very interesting that you know that the different housing complex occupy agricultural soils or lands. And my question is it's about the relevance of the irrigation in these gardens, in these areas. How the community organize to irrigate and to finance the cost of this irrigation? It's more a question about the water and the agricultural land. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. And when you say irrigations, you say maintenance.
Yeah, the use of the water in the for the green, no?
The housing complexes that I have shown have the luck to the maintenance of the big trees maintained by the municipality, and the blocks and the vegetation present in spaces that are appropriated by the people. It's the people that maintain the vegetation. It's a combination of maintenance from the institutional government and the action of their own neighborhoods, our neighborhood.
Well, my question is because you know that well, these days there are no problem of water in the south of Chile, but before there was a dry age, no, and the cost is of water for this free space maybe is a relevance question.
And it will be a big problem. It will be a big problem, and everything can happen with the climate change. Now in Santiago, there's a big flood for the people that doesn't know. And very interesting that it depends on the capacity of how they obtain the water. That's the big problem. In this case, as I say, there is a solution between the municipality and the people that live here. But now there is going to be a big problem when the waters comes out and finished.
Can I
Yes,
add something?
we have a question from Liliana Clavijo.
Yeah, but to close to, sorry,
Okay.
Liliana, if it's possible to add only one thing to Rodrigo answer. I think that the Claudio point is a very interesting point, and of course a challenge for our city and our metropolis in today and in the future. But I think that disposal of spaces in these neighborhood unit or urban complexes give us the possibility to innovate and for example, think about reuse of green water, that the domestic use of the water, and use to maintain the green area of the complexes. I think that to have this as a heritage, to have this, the space and green trees and grass, of course, it's a very it's a higher starting point than that we can maintain with, of course, innovation and to think about it. But it's a very good starting point, in my opinion.
Yeah. Liliana, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Umberto and Rodrigo. It's good to see you again. Thank you your insightful talk. I have a question that I find time to put together your talks about these common spaces, and is how communities are dealing with these spaces. I mean, it's not only policy, as Umberto said, and show very proficient about these policies, and that Rodrigo is showing about these trees and open spaces, green areas, and how these communities are creating new links and new ways to maintain, because this is so expensive spaces to have this maintenance yearly. Even when I study this neighborhood units in Colombia, I find that I have found that some of them have to rent pieces, have to of these areas, or have to create different out of the law, different ways to obtain these resources to maintain these areas, and how people are doing this. So this is my big question about these open and big areas. Thank you.
In Chile, I think it's occurred in many other places. We have the problem that in these housing complexes, many of the open spaces was privatized by a few or a group of neighbors, and that is related to the maintenance of the vegetation that are inside their appropriated space, are related with that. These green areas, in my case, and I think Umberto say the same, are a complex combination of different people that takes the advantage to create something new, to maintain something new, because they have a lot of space to do that. It's a hard question, because on every housing complexes have different ways to manage. In Chile, there are a thing that Umberto and I doesn't say. When these housing complexes were built, all the maintenance was by the Corvi, the Corporación de, perdón, de las en parte, las Caja de Empleados Particulares, the particular fund for employees. And from the, in the 1973, all the organizations have a big problem with the violent change of the government, and all the organization lost. So we lost that organization which the housing complexes was built. And from then to now, there are people, the capacity of the people how to maintain these spaces, and the capacity to the municipality. It's not the same. The municipality of Ñuñoa that is shown is not the same that the municipality of Estación Central that's shown Umberto in Villa Portales. There are different communes. There are different. They have a different incomes to them. So we can see how with the in the time those housing complexes have a different kind of public spaces.
May I introduce some ideas on that? Because of it's really that Rodrigo was telling, the process of privatization of these huge complexes became around 78 to 80, 82. And most of them who had some time taking care of the gardening were actually the better now inclusive. But sometimes the property of the land became assignated arbitrary in very, very complex and arbitrary process. That means that a huge part of the park it's property of only one block, and the other blocks has no land. So the only one pay for the water of the whole area. And also at that time, the water rights, and here in Chile is a very complex and a very, what can I say, unusual law about water. So that became a huge problem. But as Rodrigo pointed very clearly, some of the places like Portales or Villafrey were agricultural land first, and they have water because when in the time of the colonization, the valley was dry. Actually, it was very dry, and some infrastructural open channels to have water in different parts, and the all agricultural land was with water. But then became the privatization of the right of the water by the other side of the privatization of the land. So they separated this. Actually, the problems is now again, and sometimes I think there are three types of situations. One is the municipality taking care with the people in a kind of contract. That is the case of Ñuñoa or Providencia, because they are wealthy municipalities, and in the other cases are only taking care, only the people of the owners are taking care of the gardens, and the other is mostly nothing. So the garden is surviving because of the weather. That is mostly the situation.
Yeah, Horacio. Thank you, Liliana, for your Sure. But I think that what we learn in the research and what we learn in general is that Chile, but not only Chile, Chile was not prepared to manage this kind of, initiative, very complexes in terms of dimensions, number of people, because if you consider that these are these neighbor units are private spaces in co-ownership, and the manner in which the land, but also the building, the common spaces and green areas could be managed is the reglamento de copropiedad, co-ownership reglamento. ¿Cómo se dice reglamento? Co-ownership
Rules.
Huh?
Rules.
Co-ownership rules that has not the capacity to manage this complexity in legal terms, there's not the possibility, the capacity, the governance and the power to manage this complexity. And you can face this, the destiny of these different neighbor unit, not only in Santiago, but also in all the country, that are very well placed in the city, in a rich municipality, have a better destiny than other ones that are not very well located in the city or in municipality that has less money to manage the public space or the green areas. It's part of the problem.
I think it's one of the problems. It's also that the population of this area is quite old now.
Yeah.
We're young at that time, and now we're old, and only has the pensions to face the situation of the common spaces. But that is not only the problem in this huge complexes. It's also in a little apartment building with 10 owners where I live. It's the same, and the garden is in a awful situation because of that. It's a very complex social complex, mostly than the architecture, and it was very well done when it was very, what can I say, very co-produced with when it was a huge institution staying at the top of the list, because the case of Matabiel or others were very, what can I say, very, very wealthy at that time, and also the organization was very wealthy, but the people can affront the cost of the gardening mostly. The gardening or the swimming pool or all the equipments that it has. The swimming pool of Población Arauco is still running, and at the same time the swimming pool of Población Vivaceta, it's abandoned from the last 40 years. And it's a swimming pool, it's cost a lot, but it's there, and it's, you can use it mostly. It's water, and but the idea of the social functioning of these places, it's also very individual, not doing community. Mostly we ask, what is the community like, using the idea of community in a very good sense, but the community is not interested in mostly of these spaces. It's not interested in organizing what can I say, the institutions for running also. It's a very, very complex because they are neighbors, and neighbors. To be a neighbor is also what can I say, a labor or a work. Here we have it's a comment of Liliana saying, thank you, Umberto and Rodrigo. I must leave now, but I see you soon. Let's continue this amazing talk about neighborhood units. And Flavia Rinaldi says, I'm sorry I don't have a camera here, but I think that since the green spaces are providing green public space to all the community surroundings, perhaps the government could help with the maintenance. Yes, I think you have the words for answer.
Yeah, because it's completely true. And if you consider that for more than 50 or 60 years, this private space that is open to the city, open up to the city, was maintained by the the neighbor. It's very it's another challenge how this private property can be managed by public local government, or it's in terms of, if you put in terms of properties and responsibility, it's very it's a very complicated issue, because it's part of the problem. There are experiences in which new organization built inside the community or the neighbor were able to recover the green areas, but also when it was happened, this new kind of governance also closed and fences the neighbor unit, as Rodrigo said, and also Horacio. It's not easy, but it's part of the the process. I consider that it's part of the process. Not it's not that work or not work. It's degraded and not degraded. It's part of the work that we can do with this, and it's part of life of the neighbor.
Yeah, so that is very interesting issue to have other voices, not only from architects, mostly because of the organization of the society is pretty clear, and the difference with in between, I don't know, this Chile or Switzerland or Chile or Canada, it's completely evident. So I think it's maybe the kind of organization we need from the community, because we are talking about the community like an abstract, and the ways to organize the community are very precise also, and maybe we must change some rules about this kind of co-properties, and also we have some, what can I say, some programs from the municipalities to make better public spaces, but also in different cases, the way that in La Pintana they keep what can I say, it's not the word, but it's a kind of privatization of the public spaces, because they put some defenses around, and the people from the neighborhood is taking care of the place, and it's going in a good way. There are, of course, there are little amount of space in each little square, but it's happening. So maybe we can ask for other disciplines and go in more deeply way with the multidiscipline or interdisciplinary point of view. Okay. We have 1 hour and a half. Thank you, Flavia. She said we work on some convenios in Buenos Aires regarding this share maintenance and not always work. Of course, it's a formula we can use again and again and again to discover what are the problems and what are the main issues involved in the failure mostly. Okay. Thank you, all of you. We are having next week another pre-event based in 2 masterpieces from Chile, the United Nations building and the Marine Biology Institute in Montemar. And the guests are who is talking now, me, and I'm going to expose the ECLAC building. ECLAC is from the Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean. It's the Organization of the United Nations for Latin America. And the Biology Institute in Montemar is one of the first modern buildings with a very dynamic proposition with the immediately land and sea. So we hope we are increasing the knowledge on these aspects. So thank you so much. See you next Tuesday. And be attentive to our Instagram because of the links. As you can realize, we have a link to have the inscription and going through because of the security of the sessions only. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Bye. Very interesting.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.